Shalom, Israel. Grace and blessing from God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, be unto you. All praises to the Most High that we made it another week. Not quite to the Sabbath yet, but by the end of this stream, Lord's will, the Sabbath will be here. So, of course, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to the Heavenly Father. I do so in the name of His only begotten Son, and I do so by His Holy Ghost, without which we wouldn't have any understanding at all. We wouldn't be able to get the sense. We wouldn't be able to have His word. So, with all those things being said, let me check and make sure that everything's going smoothly. It appears it is, at least on my end. So, yeah, let me check this out. I'll check it on YouTube. How are we doing? Let's see. Are we live? It appears so. Praise the Most High. Are we live? Yes. And let me check Facebook too. We should be good if we're good on YouTube. Are we? It would appear so. Are we? There we go. I can hear myself on there, so Lord's will, y'all can too. I'm gonna go ahead and put my phone on silent. All right. So the biggest thing, I guess, in the news that I'm not gonna cover is Trump is talking about they about worked out a ceasefire agreement with Iran. Don't believe it. I've talked about this in the past. If they say that there's going to be peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh, right? So even if they agree to a ceasefire, it's not going to stand, right? There's still going to be escalating tension over there in the Middle East, all right? And for one thing, the state of Israel is continuing to invade Lebanon. They're just moving further north. I've seen something how they just passed the Lati River. I don't know exactly the name of the river that they passed, but I remember it's a river in Lebanon, right? A river that extends from the east of Lebanon into the south. So I assume that means that they're heading north towards Beirut. But another thing, and this happened a couple weeks ago. I think both of these things happened a couple weeks ago. Maybe this thing I'm going to talk about secondly, maybe that came like in the past week. I don't know, but concerning American politics, Thomas Massey was pretty much forced out of his position in Kentucky. More money donated to the campaign of one of his opponents, Ed Galrain, something like that, Galrain. Which nobody's ever heard of, but AIPAC, Miriam Edelson, or whoever it was, put $30 million into his campaign, the most of any a Congress race ever, right? Just to get Thomas Massey out. So if that doesn't show you American politics is a wash, then I don't know what's keeping you blinded. That should show you more than anything your vote does not matter, all right? The guy who actually represented what the people wanted, which is Thomas Massey, got booted out because he was anti-Israel. He wanted them to release the Epstein files. He was against them on the Monsanto issue as well. All of that. I don't know if I ever talked about the Monsanto issue on here, but it seems like something I either did or should talk about. But anyway, he was against the status quo. He was against big business. All right, he was against big money, and they got him right on out of there using their big money. So, is this the end of his political career? Probably not, because there's still some people that support him. But, as far as him getting into any real positions of power, very, very unlikely. So that happened, I think it was like a couple weeks ago. May 19th, maybe it was 10 days ago. But the other thing is they as in the, I guess the federal government, FBI, DOJ, whoever it is, allegedly sent a subpoena for Hassan Piker for going down to Cuba on an aid trip down to Cuba. Specifically, what any kind of charges are, I don't know, because even the subpoena is just kind of alleged, right? I don't know if they actually ever sent him anything, but some people are saying nobody ever sent him anything. It's just a rumor. Regardless, it's a political tactic. It's a political ploy, either coming from the right to scare him into silence, which isn't going to work. But they like to use fear and intimidation, or it's a political tactic from his PR team to help him gain more traction. I don't necessarily know which one it is. Either one is not really good. it's not good at all. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and bring this down, and we'll go ahead and get into the main story for tonight, because it's something that I saw last week. I wanted to dive a little bit more into, but didn't really get a chance to. And this week has been more of a slow news week, really. But here it goes. It says Bolivia in crisis, social unrest, demands for president to resign escalate. There's been these big protests going on in Bolivia. And this was like a week or two ago. Yes, this was a week ago when this was made. This article was written. It says, in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, a spiraling political conflict is threatening social stability in Bolivia. Just 6 months after the new administration took office, President Rodrigo Paz is facing a wave of demonstrations, highway blockades, and growing calls for resignation. I'm going to skip right over the recommended stories. It says the unrest began a little more than a month ago with the convergence of several sector-based demands. Some organizations were calling for wage increases. Others complained about contaminated fuel that had damaged thousands of vehicles, while additional groups protested against a law authorizing changes to land classifications, which its critics said favored land concentration among big business owners. Although the government managed to ease some of the disputes by conceding to certain demands, including repealing the land law and offering a financial bonus for teachers, as well as speeding up compensation for some vehicles damaged, indigenous groups from the highlands decided to push the protest to the limit by blocking roads in an effort to force the president to step down. Right? So the people of Bolivia, which most of the population of Bolivia, I haven't looked at the demographics or anything, but everything I've read on Bolivia, most of the people there are quote unquote indigenous, right? Are Northern Kingdom Israelites, like full-blooded. Now, even saying like full-blooded Northern Kingdom Israelites is kind of weird, because there was mixing before we came over here, but like not mixed with a white population, right? Is basically what when you say indigenous, or when I say like pure-blooded Northern Kingdom Israelites or whatever, that's what I'm going into. And we're going to get into that a little bit once we get into the history of Bolivia. That's what we're talking about this week. But anyway, on May 6th, hundreds of protesters began erecting barricades that have since surrounded the city of La Paz, the seat of government, maintaining an average of 20 simultaneous pickets each day. They have also secured the support of other organizations that have historically exerted pressure over government decision-making, including the Bolivian Workers' Union. Right? So the indigenous teamed up with the union to keep these protests going, to get the president to step down. The demand is for the president to resign due to his inability to solve the country's structural problems. He is leading us adrift. He is mortgaging the country. What future awaits our children and grandchildren? Mario Argalo, union leader of Central Obrera Boliviana, told reporters. The Andean cities of La Paz and El Alto, two of the country's most populous urban centers, and that are adjacent to each other, are facing food shortages, the suspension of classes in some schools, and disruptions to public transportation as hundreds of protesters block roads. Although many residents affected by the protests have demanded a tougher response against demonstrators in order to restore order, the government has so far ruled out declaring a state of emergency, which everything I've read, they probably should. I don't know if they have since then in the past week, but seems pretty rough, right? But the residents demanding a tougher response against demonstrators don't really know how protests work, I guess, because protests are never really done for no reason. There's usually an issue that needs to be addressed if protests are happening, right? Especially at this sort of intensity, right? Um, yeah. So the real thing, if they were smart, if the political parties of Bolivia were smart, whichever political party it is that the President Paz over there has is leading or whatever, his political advisor should tell him to step down, right? Get these protests out of the way. Despite the differing motivations of the social groups taking part in the protest, many analysts believe there is a deeper issue behind the unrest: growing discontent among indigenous and working class sectors. Naturally. And that's what this other article is about. Not necessarily, I don't think it's political unrest among indigenous, but certainly among the working class. Political and strategic shift. Rodrigo Paz was a centrist senator who, despite having a long political career, was not a nationally known figure and managed to present himself as a new candidate, quote unquote new. He became Bolivia's first president after the era of the Movement for Socialism, the MAS movement, which governed the country for nearly 20 years with record-breaking electoral victories and congressional majorities. Due to poor administrative management and corruption, MAS left the country facing a deep economic crisis and received just 3% of the vote in the 2025 elections. That is crazy, right? So this is kind of it's real interesting to see this from an American perspective, because you have this movement now in America, I'm not going to say movement necessarily because it hasn't grown to that size, but this shift in the mentality of Americans towards socialism, right? And this just kind of proves like the whole like Orwellian point of like any political party, any group of people, not even just political party, but any group of people that gains power, like they're gonna become corrupt, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely is the old expression, right? The old quote. I think that's Abraham Lincoln. But regardless, it's kind of funny seeing this, that like, socialism is gonna be the answer. It's gonna heal the country, and then we see here that there was corruption and poor administration management. Which left the country in a deep economic crisis. So that's interesting. That's interesting, or at least according to this writer, which is Maria Silvia Trigo, right? So I don't know if this is necessarily a opinion piece or if that's the general consensus that it was the movement for socialism that caused this deep economic crisis, as opposed to something else. I don't know what else it would be, especially if they had all the country's power, unless there were sanctions on the country that I don't know about. That I just find that interesting. During the election campaign, Rodrigo Paz adopted a moderate centrist discourse and rose to power largely thanks to former MAS voters. Right, he was able to swing the votes. Now, 6 months into the presidency, those voters are not only disenchanted, but also feeling excluded from the government, as Rodrigo Paz did not appoint indigenous people or working class individuals to the cabinet or to key positions within the government. What did you expect? He said he was centrist. Centrist in this modern day and age means capitalist. I mean, it is what it is. But this also should show you that no matter how you go politically, it's not the answer. All right? Because they was like, we have this new socialist movement over the past like 20 years. Right, over the modern era, since the year 2000, they were all corrupt, destroyed the country of Bolivia economically. This guy comes in as a centrist and then doesn't truly represent the people either. These groups, which had governed alongside MAS for the past 2 decades, now perceive the administration as aligned with business elites and governing in their favor. Imagine that. Somebody who claims to be centrist actually siding with business elites. Some of the policy moves that added to the discontent include Paz eliminating a tax on large fortunes, appointing members of the business elite to his cabinet, approving laws favoring agribusiness, such as the use of genetically modified seeds, and aligning himself with the United States and Israel countries with which Bolivia had no diplomatic relations. He also went from rejecting international loans during the campaign to seeking financing from organizations such as the International Monetary Fund. So that's a big, terrible move. The International Monetary Fund. If y'all haven't seen the documentary, "The End of Poverty," you'll know why that's a terrible move for your country to go to the International Monetary Fund, because they will leave your country bankrupt. It's kind of what they're known for, at least from me. Maybe they do a lot of good stuff. I don't know. Rodrigo Paz won with a very different agenda, and halfway through, he carried out a political and strategic shift, both in the composition of his administration and in its orientation. Popular sectors, therefore, perceived not only exclusion, but also an outright betrayal. Imagine that. A political candidate isn't honest and lies about what they're going to do once they get in office. Oh, good Lord. Political analyst Luciana Jauregui, I just butchered that name and I know it, told Al Jazeera it was the support of workers in rural communities that allowed Paz to win the election with 55% of the vote, she said. So that's a government traitor, renounce Inca Paz. All right. Resign Paz. And traitor government. All right. That's what them signs say. And amid the protests, former President Evo Morales, who was in power from 2006 to 2019, escalated pressure further by mobilizing his supporters for a 190 kilometer, which is a 118-mile march towards La Paz to demand the president's resignation and the suspension of judicial proceedings against the former leader. Morales is facing an arrest warrant and has been accused of abusing a teenage girl during his presidency. And that sounds about like American politics as well. But anyway. Morales was the country's first indigenous president, governed Bolivia for 3 consecutive terms, and achieved unprecedented electoral support. He governed with virtually no opposition, and his administration was marked by policies of social inclusion, indigenous recognition, and economic prosperity, driven by booming gas exports and a significant poverty reduction. Right. So initially, with the MAS, it seems everything was going well until it wasn't. In recent years, however, the country has faced a gradual economic deterioration marked by the decline of the oil and gas industry, partly because of poor management, a consequent shortage of U.S. dollars as the export fell, and rising inflation. That economic downturn ultimately led MAS to lose power amid disputes between Morales and his successor, former President Luis Arce, who battled for control of the party. Despite the power he held, Morales' departure from government was chaotic. He ultimately resigned in 2019 amid protests after seeking an illegal 4th term. Rodrigo Paz's administration has accused the former president of orchestrating a macabre plan aimed at destabilizing the government and returning to power. Officials have also claimed the protests are financed by drug trafficking, although no evidence has been presented to support these accusations. All right, so it's. And I always say this as far as the devil ain't got new tricks. All this political stuff just sounds very similar to the political stuff that's happening in America. It's not gotten this far yet, as far as, protests going to basically destabilize the entire country. But as far as the things that the political players are doing, the things that the officials are doing, the things that the presidents and ex-presidents are doing, all of that sounds very similar to things going on here. Our struggle is against those powers that receive money from drug trafficking and use the tools of terrorism to seize power by force. Call your opposition terrorists. Anyway, call protesters terrorists. Presidential spokesperson Jose Luis Galvez said during a news conference. Morales, far from addressing the accusations directly, criticized a government that he says protects business owners, bankers, and agro-industrial elites while ordinary people once again stand in lines, go into debt, and endure hunger. No speech is going to erase that reality, he wrote on X. So you can't fight reality. You can lie, but people see what's going on right in front of them. In recent days, violence has intensified in La Paz amid the convergence of multiple marches around government offices, in which miners armed with dynamite and explosive materials clashed with the police. Right, so miners, as in like people who work in mines, not like miners as in young people. Local media also reported attacks on public institutions and assaults on civilians. According to official sources, more than 120 people were detained during Monday's unrest, while at least 11 injuries were reported. For the government, the conflict has two distinct dimensions: legitimate demands and efforts aimed solely at overthrowing the president. According to the beginning of this article, some of the demands have already been met, and it seems like the protests now are just about getting the president to resign. We are going to act with two instruments: dialogue for the legitimate sectors and the full force of the law against those who are attacking democracy, Presidency Minister Jose Luis Lupo said. But like you saying democracy, but like yeah, they voted for this guy, but now if the people don't want the guy, that's also democracy, right? Without institutional representation, the social sectors that once governed alongside MAS are now seeking to reclaim a role in political decision making. Magdalena Choque, a woman protesting in the streets of La Paz, said she remained in struggle against the government because authorities are not listening to the people. They do not consult us. Everything is imposed by decrees and nothing benefits our homeland. We are being discriminated against. There is no division here. Or excuse me, there is division here. Excuse me. She said in a video recorded on the streets of La Paz and shared online. Both the elimination of the tax on large fortunes and the removal of fuel subsidies, for instance, were approved by decree, right? Not by vote. Rodrigo Paz's government had the historic opportunity to propose a new social synthesis. That opportunity is being squandered. Haragui said, although she believes the current conflict could ultimately become the basis for a new social pact that includes all sectors. Although it remains difficult to predict the direction the unrest will take, the government appears willing to cede some amount of power. The idea is to create a ministry that includes participation from social organizations. That could be an option. Public Works Minister Mauricio Zamora, a close ally of Paz, said in a radio interview. As authorities search for a way out of the country's maze of social conflict, the government has ordered police forces to periodically intervene in the blockades to establish a humanitarian corridor, allowing food and medicine to reach La Paz, which, as the country's administrative capital, occasionally becomes the stage for Bolivia's political disputes. Right. So, as far as I know, this is still raging on. When was this Democracy Now! Interview done? Today. Cool. So it says the protests in Bolivia are demanding the resignation of Rodrigo Paz, the country's first right-wing president in decades. Since Paz took office in November 2025, the country has been placed under austerity measures that have led to a surge in poverty rates for much of Bolivia's rural and working-class population. We speak to Catherine Leduber, director of the Andean Information Network in Cochabamba, Bolivia. Cochabamba, whatever. About the month-long protest, Bolivia is a country where for 19 years, indigenous people and social movements enjoyed equal rights and political inclusion, she explains. There's a huge break between what Paz promised and what he's done in practice, which is select a white upper-middle-class cabinet with only 2 women, reject any genuine dialogue, reject interaction with the Bolivian social movements, or even have any empathy for people and what they're going through day to day. Those are some strong words there. But we read similar things in this article over here about he's basically like, hey, woke is dead. We're going back to white billionaires. Lederberg also discusses the Paz administration's growing ties with the Trump administration as the U.S. seeks to expand its so-called war on drugs throughout Latin America. I don't necessarily think I'm going to read all of this, but we can start here. It says, "This is Democracy Now!" With Amy Goodman and Juan Gonzalez. Mass protests in Bolivia have marked 1 month as thousands continue to take the streets of La Paz and other cities demanding the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz, a Trump ally who has aligned himself with Latin America's right-wing leaders. Labor and indigenous groups, other protesters, are calling on Paz's government to roll back austerity measures amidst soaring costs of food, fuel, and medicine. And Angela Aguirre, translated, or she's been translated here. This is she said it in Spanish, but it's been translated. "We want the government to solve this problem, to fix it once and for all, and to do so wholeheartedly. The babies are starving. We can't afford to buy food. We seniors no longer have the money to buy food, and I have my granddaughters who are orphans. I'm asking for a solution." Okay, so this is a protester, it would seem. They showed a clip of a protester, because this is all, as it says here, a transcript from this video. So let's keep going. Earlier this week, Bolivia's Congress approved the possible deployment of armed forces to suppress mobilizations, a move that would also help President Paz declare a state of emergency in Bolivia. For more, we go to Cochabamba, Bolivia, where we're joined by Catherine Lederberg, director of Andean Information Network. We thank you so much for being with us. Lay out the escalating protest, why people are in the streets demanding President Paz's resignation. And she said, "Thanks so much for having me." I think that you summed it up nicely when you said it's about people feeding their families and a political exclusion, a racial exclusion. Remember that Bolivia is a country where for 19 years, indigenous people and social movements enjoyed equal rights and political inclusion. With the election of right-wing government Rodrigo Paz, even though he was elected as a last-ditch alternative by many of the protesting sectors, what we see is a return to the neoliberal policy, to these austerity shock measures and the removal of fuel subsidies. And it's generated a great deal of poverty, especially for Bolivian working class and subsistence farmers, right? So this is what we see. People voted this guy in. He said, "I'm going to change the economy. I'm going to make the economy better." And what did he do? He started taking money from the people and giving it to big corporate entities, right? Big business. Started feeding it to big money, all right? Juan Gonzalez, and from what I can tell, during the last few weeks, this uprising in Bolivia is perhaps the most important people's uprising in the world right now. Could you talk about how the movement grew so quickly, given the fact that this president's only been in office for 6 months? Yes, of course, social movements in Bolivia have always been very well organized indigenous communities. We're talking about a country that was colonized, but that colonization was never able to break down those strong social ties, cultural ties, or a union movement that eventually helped the first indigenous president come to power. It's something that's been brewing for a very long time. But there's a huge break between between what Paz promised and what he's done in practice, which is select a white upper middle class cabinet with only 2 women, reject any genuine dialogue, reject interaction with the Bolivian social movements, or even have any empathy for people and what they're going through day to day as they try to feed their families. It's not enough to put on a poncho for your campaign and then forget about your electorate. See, that would have been enough for him to do it in America, right? For him to do the same thing in America. All he would have to do is go to a couple farms and put on some overalls, right? And he would have been able to do it, been able to get away with it. But Bolivia, I guess, is a lot smarter than that. Juan Gonzalez, and what about Paz's claims that former President Evo Morales is behind the uprising or these protests? Well, I think they're infuriating. I think that, Evo Morales has had a long career as a social movement leader and as a former president. He definitely opposes the actions of Rodrigo Paz, but the sectors in protest are not directly affiliated with Morales. You had a small group of coca growers from Morales' base in La Paz for only 5 days, but it's a convenient one. There's the right-wing political class in Bolivia that's never developed governance strategies that find it convenient to blame Morales. They want to target him. They speak frequently his arrests, and it dovetails nicely with a very close and strong alignment with the Trump administration because, as we know, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and consecutive right-wing U.S. administrations have targeted and scapegoated Morales. This is not about him. And it infuriates protesters further because it's a way to not address meaningful demands. So, not necessarily even going to finish this out, but that's what we see going on in Bolivia right now, the protests about what's going on. And it's an affordability crisis, right? And that's what happens when there's, when people don't get the things that they need, they begin to protest, and eventually, if those protests aren't met, then they overthrow the government, right? Generally, like historically, the people would just like overthrow the government, or like a new leader would come up that addressed the people's demands, right? But here we are on the history of Bolivia, all right? I'll read a couple of these sentences, then I'll get down to the history. It says, Bolivia, officially the plurinational state of Bolivia, is a landlocked country located in Central South America. As you can see down here, I'll scroll down to where you see it on the globe there in the middle of South America. Its geography primarily consists of an Andean region to the west and tropical lowlands to the east and north. The country has a diverse environment, including the vast Amazonian plain, the Gran Chaco temperate valleys, the high altitude Altiplano plateau, snow-capped peaks, and mountains encompassing a wide range of climates and biomes across its regions and cities. All right, so I'm going to jump down to the history of Bolivia. It says the region now known as Bolivia had been occupied for over 2,500 years when the Aymara arrived. However, present-day Aymara, or I keep saying Aymara, but it's like Aymara, the Aymara, I think is how you pronounce that, the Aymara, associate themselves with the ancient civilization of the Tiwanaku polity, which had its capital at Tiwanaku in western Bolivia. The capital city of Tiwanaku dates back as early as 1500 BC, which is silly. It doesn't. When it was a small agriculturally based village, the Aymara community grew to urban proportions between AD 600 and AD 800. You see that right there? Those are more accurate right there. Because if these people say that they're the people of Tiwanaku, then saying Tiwanaku dates back this early is pretty silly, because they themselves don't date back till the Middle Ages. All right, becoming an important regional power in the southern Andes from La Paz. According to early estimates, the city covered approximately 2.5 square miles, 6.5 square kilometers at its peak, and had between 15,000 and 30,000 inhabitants. However, in 1996, satellite imaging was used to map the extent of preserved Sucacolis across, which is flooded raised fields, across 3 primary valleys of Tiwanaku, with the results suggesting a population carrying capacity of anywhere between 285,000 and 1.4, or you can say 1.5 million people. All right. So, could have been anywhere from this 15,000 number to the 1.5 million people. They really don't know. All right. Around 400 AD, Tiwanaku went from being a locally dominant force to a predatory state, aggressively expanding its reach into the Yungas and bringing its culture and ways to new peoples in Peru, Bolivia, and Chile. Nonetheless, Tiwanaku was not a violent or domineering culture. To expand its reach, the state exercised great political astuteness, created colonies, fostered local trade agreements, which made other cultures rather dependent, and instituted state cults. Right, so you had this Tiwanaku, right? That was originally the area of Bolivia, right? It first came to prominence as these Tiwanaku people, right? As rainfall gradually decreased, the stores of food supplies decreased, and thus the elites lost power. Tiwanaku disappeared around AD 1000. The area remained uninhabited for centuries thereafter, right? Tiwanaku, as a civilization, began to fall. Its empire lost luster. And then it says between 1438 and 1527, the Incan Empire expanded from its capital at Cusco, gaining control over much of what is now the Bolivian Andes and extending its control into the fringes of the Amazon basin, right? So a few generations later, after this, Tiwanaku was on the fall, the Incas began to rise, all right? And as I do want to pull this up. This is the Incan map at its height, all right? It's from Ecuador down to Argentina, all right? The west and the south, as we're about to read in the scripture, all right? The west and the south. And that's what, as you can see here, Bolivia is included in that, all right? As I said, from Ecuador down to Argentina, all right? It says the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire began in 1524 and was mostly completed in 9 years, all right? It was mostly completed in about a decade. 1533 is when it says it was mostly completed. The territory now called Bolivia was known as Charcas. I believe that's Charcas, could be Carcas, and was under the authority of Spain. Local government came from the Audiencia de Charcas, located in Chuquisaca, which is La Plata, modern Sucre. All right, founded in 1545 as a mining town, Potosi soon produced fabulous wealth, becoming the largest city in the New World, with a population exceeding 150,000. Let me look up Potosi. Let me see about Potosi. See if I can find where it's at on the map. City of Potosi. Let me see if it shows it on the map. It's a city in Bolivia. Is it more central? Kind of central. Central south. All right, as we can see here. Kind of central south here. All right. Let me go back to it. Largest city in the New World was in Bolivia, all right, at the time. By the late 16th century, Bolivian silver was an important source of revenue for the Spanish Empire. A steady stream of natives served as labor force under the brutal slave conditions of the Spanish version of the pre-Columbian draft system called the Mita. All right, so the Mita was a system of mandatory labor service in the Inca Empire. All right, as well as Spain's empire in America. Right, so these Incas had a system where you would become a slave, right? Probably, and this was the case, and I don't necessarily know how it was in this specific system of Mita, this specific Mita system, but generally speaking, among the quote-unquote indigenous, right, the Northern Kingdom Israelites that was over here, there would be like a prisoner of war type slavery going on, right? Where, hey, you just lost us in battle, you just lost us in war, and now you have to serve us, right? I'm not saying that's right or how it's supposed to be or whatever, all right? Especially among the same people. But the Spaniards would come and then take advantage of that, right? And they did the same thing in the Philippines. I've read about that specifically. They did the same thing in the Philippines where they had a current system. They had a system of slavery that was already installed, but then they would turn that into basically a chattel slavery, which is not the same thing, right? Charcas was transferred to the viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata in 1776, and the people from Buenos Aires, the capital of the viceroyalty, coined the term Upper Peru, which is Spanish Alto Peru, as a popular reference to the royal Audiencia of Charcas. Tupac Katari led the indigenous rebellion that laid siege to La Paz in March of 1781, during which 20,000 people died. As Spanish royal authority weakened during the Napoleonic Wars, sentiment against colonial rule grew. Right, so this Tupac Katari was really an innovator. Right, a revolutionary, a kind of, what's the word I'm looking, like trailblazer, I guess is a term that people would use today, right? I say innovator in that not a lot of people, especially in Latin America, fighting for freedom at that time, right? The way that he was. The struggle for independence started in the city of Sucre on May the 25th, 1809. We just passed that anniversary. And the Chuquisaca Revolution, Chuquisaca was then the name of the city of Sucre, is known as the first cry of freedom in Latin America. And again, we see in Bolivia the liberators, the leaders of liberation, all right, in among Northern Kingdom countries, all right. It was in Bolivia. That revolution was followed by the La Paz Revolution on the 16th of July in 1809, right, later that year. Just a couple months later, actually. The La Paz Revolution marked a complete split with the Spanish government, while the Chuquisaca Revolution established a local independent junta in the name of the Spanish king deposed by Napoleon Bonaparte. Both revolutions were short-lived and defeated by the Spanish authorities and the viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata, but the following year, the Spanish-American Wars of Independence raged across the continent. All right. It says a series of conflicts took place across the Spanish Empire during the early 19th century. All right. So that was the beginning of the end of Spain. Now, these revolutions themselves didn't lead to the establishment of Bolivia or anything, but it was the trend. It set the trend, right? It set the tone for the next few decades. All right. It says Bolivia was captured and recaptured many times during the war by the Royalists and Patriots. Buenos Aires sent 3 military campaigns, all of which were defeated, and eventually limited itself to protecting the national borders at Salta. Bolivia was finally freed of Royalist dominion by Marshal Antonio Jose de Sucre, with a military campaign coming from the north in support of the campaign of Simon Bolivar. After 16 years of war, the republic was proclaimed on August 6th of 1825. Right, so they had to fight from 1809 to 1825. All right, so I'm going to jump down because it talks about the transfer like back and forth between like who actually controlled Bolivia and whatnot. All right. So I'll jump down here to the early 20th century. It says, during the early 20th century, tin replaced silver as the country's most important source of wealth. A succession of governments controlled by the economic and social elite followed laissez-faire capitalist policies through the first 30 years of the 20th century. Living conditions of the native people, who constitute most of the population, remain deplorable, with work opportunities limited to primitive conditions in the mines and in large estates having nearly feudal status. They had no access to education, economic opportunity, and political participation. Bolivia's defeat by Paraguay in the Chaco War from 32 to 35, where Bolivia lost a great part of the Gran Chaco region in dispute. Let's see if it shows where that is. It does not show on the map. But here it shows it over here on this map. And it shows all the different territorial losses as well. All right. Most of which happened in the 1800s, but some in the early 1900s. All right. There's the Chaco region that was lost to Paraguay. All right. Let's go back up. All right. So, so it says, let me read this sentence again. Bolivia's defeat by Paraguay in the Chaco War, where Bolivia lost a great part of the Gran Chaco region in dispute, marked a turning point. All right. On April 7th, 1943, Bolivia entered World War II, joining the Allies, which caused President Enrique Peñaranda to declare war on the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. I just read that so I can get to this next sentence here. It says in 1945, Bolivia became a founding member of the UN. Right, so that is something I wanted to include before we go on down. All right. I guess I'll read this because it's kind of key in the next part that I want to read here. It says the Revolutionary Nationalist Movement, MNR, the most historic political party, emerged as a broad-based party, denied its victory in the 1951 presidential elections. The MNR, which is the Revolutionary Nationalist Movement, led a successful revolution in 1952 under President Victor Paz Estenssoro. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Estenssoro. Extensoro, perhaps. The MNR, having strong popular pressure, introduced universal suffrage into the political platform and carried out a sweeping land reform, promoting rural education and the nationalization of the country's largest tin mines. Right, so this is where the MNR really kind of changed the country of Bolivia. Apparently, in the 50s after this revolution, right? As it says, they nationalized the tin mines, and they got people in rural areas education, and really they give everybody the right to vote, right? The universal suffrage. But anyway, 12 years of tumultuous rule left the MNR divided. In 64, a military junta overthrew President Estensoro at the outset of his third term. The 1969 death of President Rene Barrientos, a former member of the junta who was elected president in 66, led to a succession of weak governments. Alarmed by the rising popular assembly and the increase in the popularity of President Juan Jose Torres, the military, the MNR, and others installed Hugo Banzer as president in 71. He returned to the presidency in 97 through to 2001. Torres, who had fled Bolivia, was kidnapped and assassinated in 1976 as part of Operation Condor, the U.S.-supported campaign of political repression by South American right-wing dictators. And as I was looking into the history of Brazil, I was reading all the stuff pre-colonial time. Okay, here's what Spain did. Okay, I'm scrolling, I'm skimming, looking for, okay, now where does the U.S. intervene in the politics in overthrowing a particular government, and overthrowing a particular president, and instating their guy, because that's what happened in Latin America all throughout the 20th century. So I knew somewhere I was going to read about, I didn't know it was specifically going to be Operation Condor, but I knew somewhere, okay, CIA did this, overthrew this guy, killed this guy, instated their guy. Like that literally always happened in Latin America. That is the history of Latin America in the 20th century. So, reading this, and how it feels to, you don't want to be right, but you still, damn, I hate that I was right about this. But yeah, that's just what happened. That's what America did to Latin America. And now America, wonders why everybody wants to flee Latin America and come up to the U.S., right? And it's because the countries are what, pardon my French, but this is what Trump said in his first term, shithole countries, because America did all this interventionist crap, all right? And this isn't that was so long ago. That was during certain people's lifetime. You know what I'm saying? This was during my mom's lifetime, and she's still living. You know what I mean? It's not this was that long ago. Anyway, it says the U.S. CIA financed and trained the Bolivian military dictatorship in the 1960s. The revolutionary leader, Che Guevara, was killed by a team of CIA officers and members of the Bolivian army on the 9th of October, 1967. In Bolivia, right? So Che Guevara, as a lot of people say, the t-shirt guy, the poster guy for communism, died in Bolivia. Felix Rodriguez was a CIA officer on the team with the Bolivian army that captured and shot Guevara. Rodriguez said that after he received a Bolivian presidential execution order, he told the soldier who pulled the trigger to aim carefully to remain consistent with the Bolivian government's story that Che had been killed in action during a clash with the Bolivian army. Rodriguez said the U.S. government had wanted Che in Panama, and I could have tried to falsify the command to the troops and got Che to Panama as the U.S. government said they had wanted, but that he had chosen to let history run its course and as desired by Bolivia. Okay, so, so don't do shady stuff with the body, basically, is what Bolivia said. Hey, just say it was killed here. Elections in 78 were marked by fraud, and those in 79 were inconclusive. There were coups d'etats, counter coups, and caretaker governments. Following the 1980 election, General Luis Garcia Meza carried out a coup d'etat. The Bolivian Workers' Center, which tried to resist the push, I don't know that word, putsch, was violently repressed. More than 1,000 people were killed in less than a year. cousin of one of the country's most important narco traffickers, Garcia Meza, favored the production of cocaine. After a military rebellion forced out Garcia Meza in 81, three other military governments in 14 months struggled with Bolivia's growing economic problems. Unrest forced the military to convoke the Congress elected in 1980 and allowed to choose a new president. In 1982, Hernan Siles Zuazo again became president 22 years after the end of his first term of office, right? So just great civil unrest around this time when the U.S. intervened. Who could have thunk it, all right? Though there was a bit of military unrest before the U.S. dipped their toes in it, right? You have the MNR who really revolutionized the way that the government worked there, but even they kind of fell apart. And we see the same thing with the MAS, right, in the modern day. And as I said here, that Hugo Bonser was president through the 2001, and that kind of leads us to what's the name of the modern guy? I know I was going to say it. Not Lozada. Where is not Bonser? Who's the guy? Morales, Evo Morales. All right. And he stayed president for about 20 years, right? So, with all that being said, let's get to the scriptures concerning Naphtali, because that's who Bolivia is. Bolivia is Naphtali. You have a lot of Israelites who don't think they to be honest, they don't think about South America all that much. They just go by what people have taught them. I don't know if Genesis 49 does speak of Naphtali as far as like a hind let loose. All right. Let's see. Does it use the word let loose, or am I making things up? Genesis 49 concerning Naphtali. All right. Where is Naphtali? 21. Yeah, hind let loose. Naphtali is a hind let loose. He giveth goodly words. And Buenos Aires, it did mention, Bolivia became part of that viceroyalty in colonial times. And it said they were kind of governed by Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires means good heirs. I said good words there, but very similar. All right. Let's get Deuteronomy 33 concerning Bolivia. And this is more about the Inca and the territory that they controlled. In Deuteronomy 33. Come on now. And I forget which verse, but it's Deuteronomy 33 and it's on down. Perhaps 20, 22, somewhere around in there. No, it's not Dan. 23. Here we go. So in Deuteronomy 33 and 23, and it says, "And of Naphtali, he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full with the blessing of the Lord." So that is key right there. As far as, like I said, being the leaders of like revolution, as far as the like tin production, silver production, even I guess during the time of Evo Morales, it was more about like gas and oil and things like that. Satisfied with favor, right? Founded the UN, one of the founding members of the UN. All right, it says, "Full with the blessing of the Lord, possess thou the west and the south," and that's what I pulled up here with the Incas. That is the west and the south. That's very clear. That's very plain. All right. You can't really mention Chile and Argentina without mentioning Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador, right? Because that's all part of that same Incan Empire. All right. So concerning Naphtali, and I mentioned this before when I talked about the 12 tribes and where they're at. The 12 tribes chart needs to correct that, because a lot of people, and they're going off of like what the ISUPK original One West 12 tribes chart. Y'all need to correct that, all right? Because it's Just saying Argentina and Chile is Naphtali, and I was guilty of it in the past, right? I was still using that 12 tribes chart until I went back over it, went back over the prophecy, and the Lord revealed this to me about the Incas. They had the West and the South, that is from Ecuador down to Argentina. That is the West and the South of South America, right? As you can see here, just Chile and Argentina, that would just be the South. That wouldn't be the West, right? So I say that just to remind the people, hey, don't go off what man say, go off what God say, right? But also just generally speaking to show Bolivians, hey, the indigenous of Brazil, the people, not Brazil, the indigenous of Bolivia, the indigenous of pretty much all the West, you are the Israelites, come back to the commandments of the Most High God. The people of Bolivia come back to the commandments of the Most High God. This is the covenant that we made with our Creator, that we made with our God, all right? In Deuteronomy 28, because here in Deuteronomy 28, when you read either Deuteronomy 1 and 1, you can read that, or you can read Deuteronomy 27, it mentions all the tribes. Naphtali being one of those tribes. I'll go ahead and get that real quick in Deuteronomy 27. Deuteronomy 27, I think it's around 13, 14. No, here we go. Naphtali is mentioned in verse 13. All right. Starting with verse 11, though, it says, and Moses charged the people the same day, saying, these shall stand upon Mount Gerizim to bless the people when you come over Jordan, Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Joseph and Benjamin. And these shall stand upon Mount Ebal to curse, Reuben, Gad, and Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. All right, so there you have Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. We're going through these curses. All right, all the tribes are going through the curses to this day because we rejected our God. We turned away from His laws. We started worshiping things of nature when it comes to the indigenous. Right, we started worshiping like the Assyrians did, like the Assyrians had taught us. We brought that back to remembrance and became animists, is the official religious term for it, worshiping animals and nature, all right, as opposed to worshiping the Creator. So all 12 tribes were present when going over these blessings and these curses. Now, that's what that chapter shows in Deuteronomy 27. Now, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1, it says, and it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all His commandments which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all the nations of the earth. All right, and the Bolivians had that at one point in time when we served God back in our land before we even came to the West. All right, but jumping down to verse 15, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all His commandments and His statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Right? So I'll read verse 16 here. It says, cursed shalt thou be in the city. And that's where they're at right now. All these protests in the city because they elected a guy who come and grifted them, essentially, to take away their money, take away their representation, take away their resources. All right. And cursed shalt thou be in the field, the rural farmers that it's talking about. He got the favor of the rural agriculturalists. All right. And what he do? He turned on them. All right. Cursed in the fields to this very day. All right. So, jumping down, we'll talk about like what they did to what the Spanish did. Verse 25. Yes, verse 25. It says, the Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Right? The Spaniards came and was slaying the so-called indigenous. Right? The tribe of Naphtali there. The Incas. All right? And the way that the Spaniards would do it is that they would ship the natives of a particular region to wherever they wanted them to work at, right? Whatever plantations they wanted them to work at. But it would seem that the mines, they would ship them to the mines in Bolivia that they had discovered. Um, but there may be more history to that I did not cover. Again, I just use Wikipedia as not as a source itself, but rather Wikipedia is a collection of sources. But if I had like a book on Bolivia specifically, then that would probably give much more detail as far as like what the Spaniards actually did. All right. I don't believe it's in the book, Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies, because that's generally about the Caribbean area. But anyway, let's go down, because it said they used the Mita system, right? They enslaved the people. They forced them into labor. So I'll start with 47. It says, because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things, therefore shalt thou serve thy enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things, right? You have to go to your enemies, the Spaniards in this case, when we're talking about the literal slavery of back then. Now it's La Paz, right? Not La Paz, because that's the city, but President Rodrigo Paz, excuse me. And he's bringing in these white businessmen, right, to rule over the people of Bolivia, which is mostly still indigenous, all right? And in nakedness and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. And that's what the Spaniards did to the people of Bolivia. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. What was the symbol of imperial Spain? It was the eagle, all right? I know I got that in my photo somewhere, but I'm not going to go through it. But that was the symbol of imperial Spain. It is the eagle, all right? A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, right? The people, the indigenous of Bolivia, they didn't speak Spanish initially. Now everything's named Spanish in Latin America. Now everything has a Spanish name. Now everything all throughout Latin America has a Spanish name. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And that is the epitome of the Spaniards. They were chopping people to bits, but they didn't bring back the silver, or the silver in the case of Bolivia, or the gold in the case of like Mexico, or the DR, right? Santo Domingo. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land, specifically the fruit of thy land when it comes to the silver mines, all right, until thou be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kind, or the flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee, right? And that's what happened. This was prophecy, now it is history, because it's came to pass, all right? So, what do we do about it? Because the curses have already happened. As we can see, history has played out. The curses have happened. Specifically, I know I'm talking about Bolivia, but generally for the Israelites, what do we do now? In Deuteronomy 30, it tells us. Moses was not shy about what we need to do once these curses happen. In Deuteronomy 30, in verse 1, and it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, right? Bolivia being one, and shall return unto the Lord thy God, and shall obey his voice, according to all that I command thee this day, right? So it's time to repent. It's time to wake up. Thou and thy children, with all thy heart and with all thy soul, right? Sincerely and fully. That then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. He's going to bring us back to our homeland. All right. If any of thine be driven out unto the utmost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee. He's going to bring us back. It doesn't matter where we went, he's going to bring us back. And from thence will he fetch thee. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers, right? He will bless us above Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Bless us above David and Solomon. That was kind of the peak of Israelite rule, right? And the Lord thy God will circumcise thy heart and the heart of thy seed to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, that thou mayest live, right? He's going to give us a new mind, a new body, whenever you read 1 Corinthians 15, right? And the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee, right? So to the people of Bolivia specifically, God's going to put these curses on those white businessmen who's trying to rule over you now, right? Going to put these curses on those Spaniards who did all those evil things to you in the past, all right? And thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord and do all his commandments, which I command thee this day. All right, so God said, look, when he gathers us back, he will put all these curses on our enemies. He's going to flip the curse, right? Right now, the Israelites get the curse and the other nations get the blessings, right? But God said, nope, I'm going to flip that because that's not the natural order of things anyway. My people are supposed to be getting the blessings. Y'all supposed to be getting the curse, all right? So, from there, as I do whenever I talk about the history of any country generally, especially in Latin America, I get the prophecy in Revelation 7 about these people returning to the Most High. It is prophecy that his 12 tribes will return to him, all right? As we just read in Deuteronomy 30. Moses said the same thing, all right? It's just said in a different way, all right? The prophets all have the same message. They just say it in a different way. In Revelation 7 and verse 4, it says, and I heard the number of them which were sealed. This seal, I'll go ahead and read it because I ain't read it in a little bit. In Isaiah 8 and 16, talks about this seal. All right. Ain't talking about a sea lion. All right, when it says seal. All right. It ain't even talking about like a stamp, like that kind of seal. All right. It ain't talking about the seal of the U.S. All right, with the eagle on it and stuff. All right. This seal is a metaphorical seal, but a very real seal nevertheless. All right. In Isaiah 8 and 16, it says, bind up the testimony. I want to make sure this stops here. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. All right, so the law of God, that's his seal. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. All right, so in Revelation 7 and verse 4, and I heard the number of them which were sealed with what? The law, the laws of God. And there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. Of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Over here in the west, that would be your so-called African Americans. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. That would be your Creek family tribes, including the Seminole. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. That would be the rest of your so-called Native Americans and First Nations. Of the tribe of Asher, which is Asher, were sealed 12,000. That would be Colombia to Uruguay. All right, your Brazilians. Of the tribe of Naphtali, which is Naphtali, were sealed 12,000. That would be your Ecuadorians to Argentinians, aka the Incas, and that includes the Bolivians as well. All right, of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. That would be your so-called Cubans. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. That would be your so-called Dominicans. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. That would be your so-called Haitians. Of the tribe of Issachar were sealed 12,000. That would be your so-called Mexicans over here in the west. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. That would be your so-called Central Americans. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. When it says Joseph here, it's referring to Ephraim, because Ephraim received the birthright of Joseph. And that would be your so-called Puerto Ricans over here in the west. Of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. That would be your so-called Jamaicans, West Indians, Trinidadians over here. And that makes up your 12 tribes in the west. All right. But as it said up here in verse 6, Bolivians are mentioned as well. So, hey, you're one of God's chosen people. Repent, come back to the commandments of God, as it is written that you were prophesied to do. Because if you don't, then God will find somebody who will. Just point blank, straight up and down. If that chosen generation that Peter talked about is not us, then he's just going to choose a different generation. So we might as well come to him now, because there's no way to stop the word. There's no way to prevent the truth, only to help it, right? Only to further it. So why not us, right? If not us, then who? That's the way I look at it. So here we get the benediction real quick. I'm going to close it out. Also, I do want to say the new moon is this weekend, immediately following the Sabbath. We will be entering the 4th month. So all praise to the Most High for that. Y'all keep it with joyfulness and gladness. So I'll start with the benediction here in verse 6. Now when Jesus was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much, and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this that this woman hath done be told for a memorial of her. And I know these classes go all over the world, so all praises to the Most High. I do want to give all praise, honor, and glory to the Heavenly Father. I do so in the name of His only begotten Son, and I do so by His Holy Spirit. To be honest, where I'm at, it doesn't even quite look like the Sabbath just yet, though we are getting there. We are getting to that time of year where the days are very long. So if you're on the East Coast, it will be the Sabbath for you already, or anywhere east of that. However, if you're anywhere west of me, it probably won't be the Sabbath yet. Regardless, I do want to say happy Sabbath and shalom, and let God be magnified.